Jeez, we get really quiet really fast. Okay, I think we are good to go. Live. Okay, great. Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome. We are opening up our Board of Regents meeting, and we are at the Washington State University Health Sciences campus in Spokane, Washington. So excited to be here. This is just, I know it's a time of complete exhaustion for many as we are watching so many of our graduates get to the finish line. And just an exciting time, and especially just on our campus here to be able to sit today and tomorrow to see the future pharmacists, future medical students that are becoming doctors and future nurses to be graduating from Washington State University is such an exciting thing, and just a meaningful thing as we know what the need is across our state and in our country right now. So welcome. It's Thursday, May 5th, and we want to make sure and announce to everybody that we are live via Zoom and we are streamed over YouTube. Just want to, for housekeeping purposes, let everyone know Regents will be taking periodic breaks throughout the day. That weirdly, we do need those. And so moving right along, we have a jam-packed 2 days ahead of us. I just thank you to the Regents who are here with us today. We will move right into the start of our Executive and Governance Committee. I'd like to introduce a future action item, and we will be having discussion on that today. It's the proposed amendments to the Board of Regents Committee Charters Policy, Committee Structure, and Schedule. And so I'm going to turn it to President Kurt Schultz and our Senior Assistant Attorney General, Danielle Hess.
Great. Well, Kirk, did you want to make some introductory remarks, or would you like me to just dive into it?
Well, I just think over the last year, we've had some conversations among senior leadership internally about, the board has changed in terms of its composition. I think a little bit of expectations about engagement, involvement, and more things than when I arrived in 2016. I think as we talked to Danielle and Des and Elizabeth and other chancellors, we said, well, why don't we propose a new way perhaps of structuring our board meetings? And we spent some time with Marty, Lisa, and others and decided to kind of bring that forward conceptually earlier. We've had several discussions on that, and now we're ready, to kind of say, okay, here's an official set of ways that we would propose to operate. So I think, to me, it's an evolution. It doesn't mean that somehow we weren't doing things right before. 4 or 5 years from now, there may be a time when the board says, hey, let's go back to a different way of doing our business and structuring our particular committees. But at this point in time, frankly, almost all of you, if you weren't in a particular subcommittee around a particular topic, we would have these other conversations saying, hey, I'd like to know more about that. I'd like to be involved and engaged in those types of things. So I think this reflects where we believe it makes sense for us to be today, and really looking forward to working with you all as a board to make sure that you're feeling utilized effectively, that you're giving us advice and counsel on many of the different things that are facing public higher education today. And I think this structure does that. So I'll stop with that. And Danielle, I'll let you get into the nitty-gritty details.
Great. So I'll just kind of go through the significant changes, and then anybody who wants to stop and have a discussion, just let me know. So we've got 2 related future action items. One is proposed amendments to the committee charters, which is Board of Regents Policy 3, and then the other one is the proposed amendments to the bylaws, and they're related. So this is, as Kurt indicated, it's a follow-up to our discussion at breakfast at the last meeting. And so we made a decision to propose that the Regents consolidate the committees from 6 to 4. Basically, we're going to have 3 of those will be committees as a whole. So all Regents attend each committee. There would no longer be any concurrent committees. And so it becomes more of a way to simply organize the Regents discussions rather than subgroups of the full Board of Regents. So the Student Affairs and Student Life Committee would be consolidated with the Research and Academic Affairs. And so That committee would now be called the Academic and Student Affairs Committee. Institutional infrastructure would be consolidated with finance and compliance. And so that committee would then be the Finance and Administration Committee. And then still have the Strategic and Operational Excellence Committee, and then the Executive Committee, which is the chair, the vice chair, and the past chair. We are adding inclusion, diversity, equity, and access to each committee charter. So each committee will have oversight within, I'm just going to refer to it as IDEA, with inclusion, diversity, equity, and access issues within its purview. And then we're going to have the Strategic and Operational Excellence Committee be kind of the steering committee and have sort of coordinating oversight among all of the other committees. We also beefed up language regarding presidential assessment and compensation in the Executive Committee charter. That committee has always been responsible for that. We're just making it a little bit more clear and specifically citing to the Board of Regents policy on presidential assessment. One of the things that we added was a single designated primary liaison from the president's executive team for each committee. We've kind of had that, so it's been clear in some cases who among the administration is in charge of this committee, and in some cases it was really clear. In some cases it wasn't always clear, and so I think we're going to have somebody who's clearly designated from the administration to be responsible for that committee. We added extension and corporate engagement to the Strategic and Operational Excellence Committee, and then just made a bunch of edits to the committee charters to kind of shrink them down and make them more concise and more clear and easier to read. I'm not sure if anybody ever actually read all of them before, because it was such a beefy document.
I did.
Oh, okay.
Did you send it?
Yes, of course.
Okay.
So and a couple of additional thoughts. We were thinking for those issues that the regents are really interested in drilling down on, we're going to use maybe increase the use of ad hoc committees. It's not something that we've used a lot. We created an ad hoc presidential advisory committee when we did the presidential search 2015, 2016, but haven't really used ad hoc committees much. And so I think that's something that we could, the regents could really use a little bit more. And then I think one of the things that this helps is the reporting out on Friday. Because every regent will have been in every committee, meeting discussions can be summarized briefly and succinctly. And so I think it's really going to help with the flow of the meeting on Friday. So those are kind of the thoughts in terms of the proposed revisions, and appreciate any comments or thoughts or questions. And yeah.
I think it's a great idea. And as I think back to the 2016 timeframe when we put the last structure together, since then, the issues, we had a lot of things going on, and it actually was useful to have more of a committee, more subcommittees. But I just think that the issues that have been coming forward in the last few years have been larger issues that actually the entire board really needs to see, as opposed to one subset. Particularly this year, I noticed it a lot already with the Academic Affairs Committee. There were so many times when I was thinking, how can I in a few minutes summarize what we learned to everybody and give them the full flavor? Because yes, you can read the agenda items, but there's so much discussion that goes on in between the lines. So I think this is a really good move, and I think it's a great structure for us.
Yep, Laura, I aligned with, I think we all consistently crave a little bit more detail, and in that, curiosity that we have and desire to learn more, I also think that puts an extra added burden on our faculty and our administration around trying to, in some duplicity of trying to, make sure the committee is aware with what they need, but now, oh, Marty wants more information, or Jeanette might not, have gotten that piece of it. So I think there's also, out of respect and just trying to streamline on behalf of the work and the preparation that goes into these committees for our WSU folks. So I think that the board is trying to be mindful of that as well. So.
And Danielle, I appreciate the efficiency as well. I think also in the onboarding materials, I think more work to connect the dots so that we can all accelerate our learning curve would be
Yes.
helpful.
Totally.
Because otherwise we're just a sponge trying to organically absorb it. And so
Through a fire hose.
I would just suggest that, yeah, we put those cleaned up charters and some onboarding.
Definitely will, and I'd like to have a deeper conversation about Regent onboarding. I think as part of my new position, I'm gonna really try to drill down on that and beef it up and make any improvements that we need there. So definitely would love some specific
We have a good
suggestions.
question
Mhm.
in our assessment that the board is working on, a board assessment around onboarding. We have, and I think you'll get some good feedback
Wonderful.
around where we can continue to evolve and enhance onboarding, because it is a lot to consume. And then be also, while you're consuming it, you're trying to real time be ready and be responsible to be taking, positions and votes on things. So. Other comments on committee structure?
I think I would just add that I really appreciate the equity lens that we're utilizing here, the accessibility and the transparency. So I find that 2 full days, if you're someone who wants to engage as a stakeholder, watching all of this is difficult. Watching the committees and then bringing it back together, and it just seems as though this provides more opportunity for more inclusion and engagement outside of those that sit in this room with us.
Yeah, definitely. And just from a logistical standpoint, it makes it a lot easier to live stream than having 3 concurrent committees going on at the same time. So.
Okay, then let's move to our proposed amendments to the Board of Regent bylaws.
Great, and yeah, so this is a sort of a similar type of issue. A lot of these kind of work together. So the second future action item, and to be taken for a vote in June, would be proposed amendments to the bylaws. And this was spurred by the addition of a faculty regent, which the legislature passed this session. So we're really excited about that. We've had for several years now a faculty representative to the Board of Regents, sort of not wanting to keep waiting for the legislature to do something. And so now we get to officially remove that faculty representative and include a faculty regent in accordance with the new legislation. So names have been submitted to the governor, and the new faculty regent, I think, starts officially on October 1st under the legislation, but the person might be appointed prior to the September meeting, in which case they'll just attend but wouldn't be able to vote quite yet at that time. So the faculty regent has to be a full-time or emeritus faculty. And I know the Faculty Senate is working on a process for nomination in the future. And they've agreed to share that with Des and me, so we can take a look and just provide any feedback that we might have there. So the proposed bylaw change eliminates the faculty rep and adds the faculty regent. Some other changes include some changes with respect to language regarding officer elections. We're amending that to specifically provide for an additional year term. We were kind of doing that informally anyway, so I thought we'd go ahead and add that specifically. There is a statement in there that the faculty and the student regent cannot serve as chair or vice chair. And the reason for that is that they're excluded from participating in matters pertaining to personnel, which would include the hiring of and the evaluation of the president, which is of course one of the most important tasks that the board does. They also have shorter terms, which make it logistically very challenging to serve in those roles. Other amendments, we made some amendments to the public comment provisions. There's some new legislation that requires us to allow individuals with disabilities to comment remotely. Anyone who wants to comment remotely will have to pre-register. And then we also need to allow an option for written comment from anybody who's interested in submitting their public comments in a written format. Adding some language to encourage university officials to appear at board meetings in person. I know that's been very important to kind of keep that those connections going. And again, reiterating this primary liaison for each Board of Regents committee. So that's also duplicated in the bylaws as well as the committee charters. And added some new language regarding ad hoc committee requirements in anticipation of greater use. They're going to have a written charge and a designated board chairperson. They're advisory only, a list of existing ad hoc committees would be available on the board website, and the committees would automatically sunset after 2 years unless they were extended by the chair. So that's pretty much the summary of significant changes to the bylaws. If anyone has any questions or comments or thoughts?
Comments, thoughts? Okay. Thank you, Danielle. I appreciate the
Great.
updates.
Yeah, we'll bring
To
both of these to the
tomorrow.
June
Or yeah, to June.
retreat as action items.
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for the work. Thank you guys as well for help on the committee. Okay, our next action item that we will be taking tomorrow is the Board of Regents election of officers. We discussed that in our last meeting, and so that will be coming, that slate will be coming before us tomorrow morning. At this time, then, this is the conclusion of the Executive and Governance Committee. We will now move to our Strategic and Operational Excellence Committee. I just want to remind the audience, we still are live. We're still on YouTube, and the links are all available through the Board of Regents website.
So last summer, when we look back at some of our discussions that we had together, the Regents expressed a desire to be more involved in, so we say, more strategic discussions in addition to the fiscal things and stuff that are just kind of part of the Regents doing university business. And so what we did is, we started meeting. We used to meet, if you go back a year, we didn't start until lunch on today, and we kind of moved that to earlier, with the idea that this morning session really be around very strategic type of items. And so I think it's been interesting. I look forward to formal discussions, just at breaks, on hearing what you like about this session. I think for us, it's been good because I feel we've been able to take some things that you all have expressed some strong interest in and do more than a 10-minute presentation on things like enrollment or marketing or those types of things. So I want to make sure that during the summer, as we do our retreat, that we're always asking ourselves, are we hitting the mark? Are we getting the right things in front of you all as Regents? And then are we making sure that we're involving and engaging you in some of the really tough issues that we have facing Washington State University, where you all can bring a lot to bear. So this morning, when we talked to Marty and we're arranging this agenda, there really were two major areas that I felt that I just wanted to make sure we kind of finished the year on. The first was really around enrollment management. We keep talking about what our student numbers are going to look like. And rather than Kirk and Elizabeth always just going, well, we'll get some folks here, we want to make sure that Saichi, who came in, if you remember, in September, and kind of laid out what the recruitment cycle is going to look like for the year. We got a team here, and I'll let Elizabeth talk more about that. The second issue is around Marcom, telling our story, things like that, which has been a continual theme for Regents meetings, and having Phil come back and talk a little bit about some of the investments that we'll be making institutionally in Marcom, celebrate some success around the recent $20 million gift. And it wasn't the gift itself, is what did we do with that announcement? How did we push out some of our messaging to make sure that we're going to some of our key markets where we get students and people are seeing that WSU is serious about what we're doing in the particular spaces. So, and then what does success look like in our storytelling? That's going to be important, because each of you probably would answer that question slightly differently. And if we're not careful, we're going off in 15 directions. And then a year from now, you go, well, Kirk, I don't see it as any better. And some people may say, yes, it is. Some people not. So to me, I want to get some consensus over the next 2 meetings from you all as Regents on telling our story better. What does success look like there? Where at the end of another year, you all say, wow, okay, you all have made substantial progress in this area. So that's what I want to see come out of this in the next 2 hours. I think these are 2 great meaty topics, and certainly of interest to you all as a board and us as a leadership team. So, thank you, Marty.
Yeah, just a thank you to the Board of Regents for, setting up yet more time, because that's requiring most of us to kind of come in on a Wednesday and be here in the mornings. So we appreciate the time commitment. It's a real thing, but it does allow us to be more engaged and more informed. So, Elizabeth.
All right, well, so the first presentation concerns enrollment and retention, as Kirk mentioned. And Seichi came to us, I think it was a year ago at the retreat, and sort of talked about his strategic vision and working with the chancellors on a system-wide approach to student recruitment. And so we wanted to give you an update, of course, on the numbers, so where we stand in terms of our enrollment. We've been giving you updates throughout the year, but give you an update on that. But then we also wanted to provide some context for those numbers in terms of what we're doing to support students holistically. What are we doing with recruitment, but also what are we doing in terms of retention and student success and student support? And so I thought it would be great for you to hear from. We have 3 folks here. I didn't see Seichi, but
He's out in those.
he's out. Would someone mind
I'll go
just
get him.
grabbing Seichi?
I'll get it.
It looked like a mimosa, but I'm sure.
Yeah. We're actually running out of schedule, so you're probably wondering, but Bill Davis, who is the interim vice provost for academic engagement and student achievement, Ellen Taylor, vice chancellor for student affairs, and Seichi Oba, our vice provost for enrollment management, for them each to talk about their areas of responsibility in the student success retention. Here I was, I
thought I was
just
gonna
gave
be
you
the
a
only one.
fine
Yeah,
introduction.
you were gonna have to find, just run with it.
Sit right up at the front there,
Okay,
next to Ellen.
sure.
So,
Welcome, you guys.
yeah, welcome.
Yeah,
You
thank
didn't,
you.
you didn't hear what I said you were gonna talk about, so, how do you know you're?
Hopefully it's,
It is a mimosa.
yeah, hopefully it's enrollment.
Yes.
That's what I
Seichi, you
prepared
know,
for.
welcome, because the last time you were here, I think you had just arrived. I don't even know, had you even gotten a chance to get your feet on the ground, like living in the state of Washington from Alaska, so.
Well, thank you very much. I've actually been able to present to you twice now. So 11 months ago in Seattle, and then in fall, I was able to do an update in fall as well. So,
So we're gonna turn it right over to you. I sort of gave the background.
The clicker's live,
There you go.
okay,
I've been told.
thank you very much. Well, good morning. It's good to see you all again. I'm Seichi Oba. I'll start this, and then I'm going to hand the presentation to Dr. Bill Davis, and Bill will then hand it over to Dr. Ellen Taylor. And with that, let's go ahead and begin. So I'm going to start at a pretty high level, some atmospherics. What's it like to be in enrollment management today, obviously with the backdrop of the pandemic? One of my staff gave me this analogy I'm going to use today. He said, imagine you were trained to fly airplanes, and you had fixed routes, and you had airports with runways, and people knew how to board your aircraft because maybe somebody in their family had boarded an aircraft before, and you knew what to expect when you got on the airplane, right? A safety briefing, perhaps a snack, perhaps a cold drink. And then the pandemic hits, and they take your plane away, and they give you a helicopter. And they say, there's no airports, there's no fixed routes. You're going to swoop in and you're going to pick up students and parents and customers wherever you find them. So now you land in the desert or fields. Nobody knows how to board a helicopter. Nobody's done it before. And so your only hope is to strap them in tight and tell them, hey, hang on, it's going to be a bumpy ride. That's a really good depiction of enrollment management over the last 2 years. One of the things that you're all familiar with is the Great Resignation, millions of people leaving their jobs. In enrollment management, we have a term we're using called the Great Interruption. And that refers to the students who are not coming out of high school directly to college. It also refers to students who are in college but are choosing to stop or interrupt their education. As a nation, about 7% of students have left higher education since 2019. In Washington, it's about the same at 6.9%. This is the landscape that we find ourselves in. One other point I'll make on this slide in particular, maybe a week and a half ago, Regent Schotter met with Phil Weiler and I, and he asked me to address at least one of the issues that was appearing in the articles in the Seattle Times, and the decline of males in higher education. And So let me talk a little about that. First, this is not a new phenomenon. It has been occurring for decades. Like many things, the pandemic has just accelerated some of these declines. In the state of Washington, one of the contributing factors is your low college going rate, our low college going rate. 35% of high school students go directly from high school graduation to a four-year university. An additional 25% go to college, community college, or technical school. Combined, that gives you about a 60% ongoing rate. In the country, that rate is about 66%. So we're behind on that level. In Washington, at WSU, we have 46% of our students are males. Only one public school has a higher percentage in that central Washington. They're at 47%. So I think we're holding our own. We don't want to lose anymore, but I don't think the sky is falling. In the last 3 years, our applicants from males have declined, except this year. This year, they're 5% ahead of where they were this time last year. Let's talk about fall 22. I think when I spoke with you back in September, I mentioned that one of the things we needed to do in admissions is have a fast, firm start. And we did. We opened the application on August 1. We had most of our recruitment teams back out in schools, at college fairs, for those that were open. We were able to bring students to campus, visitors to campus, and that includes all campuses. And that was a really big thing, to bring people back. We still had masks, we still had the vaccination mandate, but bringing people back is an important part of the strategy to make them cougs. In Pullman alone, we've seen 30% more visitors this spring than we did last year. But we're doing other things as well. We know how important it is to have students go from confirmation to orientation. So we've this year provided fee waivers for students with high need. So we're paying their orientation fee. We're providing transportation to Pullman from the west side or from the north side. We've also, throughout the system, implemented a confirmation award for students who have not yet confirmed with WSU. And it's pretty nominal, but it's for only residents with need. And we implemented this 3 weeks ago, and 321 students have confirmed in that 3-week period. So we know it works. We know it took that little push to get them over. We're not out of the woods yet. We're going to talk about transfers next. And that's really where we see a huge challenge ahead of us. Actually, we'll go through first years first. I tell everybody first year enrollment for fall will be a story of good news and bad news, right? A little of both. A year ago, all of those elements or cells would be in the red. Now we only have a few, and in fact, a couple of them have turned black since I had this data. Pullman's doing pretty well on this, but so are the other campuses as well. One thing, and it's probably hard to see at this distance, but I'll just point it out. Vancouver has this phenomenal increase in applications, and part of it is the great work of Vancouver, but Vancouver is also living off sort of the benefit of international programs using the Common App for international programs. And so you have a number of students who see Vancouver, WSU, and they're putting in an application. And this is directly from the team there who have been looking at those applications since fall. Good news, bad news here. We anticipate more first-year students in fall. That's what we're hanging on to. Now transfer students. So if the story was good news, bad news for first-year students, the story here is bad news followed by more bad news. And sometimes gallows humor is the only thing that gets you through the day. What you see here is a reflection of the 24% decline in community college enrollment over the last 2 years. If they don't start at a community college in Washington, they can't transfer to us. 2/3 of our transfer students come from Washington community colleges.
Say one more time, 24% decline over 2 years in transfers.
24% decline in community college enrollment over the last 2 years. And some have been even more dramatic, and I think Chancellor Netzhammer would agree with that. Now, there is a silver lining here, and here it is. Transfer students have some time to make their decision for fall. So we know quite a few of them wait until the end of the quarter, which will be June, to make a decision about fall. So we're trying to capitalize on it. We're offering some incentives. If you apply before June 1st, we'll waive the application fee. If you confirm by July 15th, we'll provide some additional monetary incentives. All students, all community college transfer students are provided or offered a one-on-one appointment to talk about how classes transfer. Over the last probably month and a half, and this really is in Bill's shop, some of his team have held between 28 and 30 one-on-one appointments a day. So we know the needs there, but what we're up against is the students who didn't show up for the last 2 years.
Before you completely leave, Sai-Chan, in your last slide, you mentioned several, because I like the ones with all the black on there. Several of these would flip to black now if you updated the date. I'm just curious what those would be.
Yeah, the big one would be in Pullman, admits have gone black. And then confirmations in Pullman have, we've gained more confirmations. We're 100 people behind where we were a year ago. But the biggest one was admits went to black.
What is driving the 24% decline in enrollment of community colleges in our state?
I think there's a couple of things that are driving it. One, students who pick a community college or technical college often are using it because it's a low cost point of entry. So if you have fewer means, the pandemic has been extra hard on you. I think many of the programs, especially in the technical colleges, I'll call them applied programs, really had to be shuttered completely. So you couldn't hold welding virtually. And so I think that really took away some of their enrollment as well.
Can I just add from my perspective, and I would be interested in Chancellor Netzhammer's perspective as well. Clark College, which is a pretty significant feeder to WSU Vancouver, I don't know that welding would have translated to WSU Vancouver enrollment. They have had a decline far before the pandemic that has been so significant that it has affected WSU Vancouver enrollment. And yet WSU Vancouver has done a great job of continuing to have enrollment. So, I mean, I think there's so much in that ecosystem that's happening that's making it challenging. And then you add a pandemic on top of that and a great resignation, and now we're really significant kind of deficit to pull ourselves out of, which requires kind of this whole strategy that we're talking about today. But that one in particular, I mean, Clark has had a tremendous decline for years.
May I speak?
You normally don't have.
Yes, that is true. 10 years ago, Clark College had 16,000 students. This quarter, they have 6,700 students. So that, and 10 years ago, we were more than 2/3 Clark College students. So that has been our biggest issue. And one of the huge achievements is that for many years, we stayed flat, even as Clark College was really declining. I think the way that I've talked about it on my campus is that what we had was a dial, and COVID turned that into a switch, and suddenly they were all gone overnight, and you can see the numbers. It's going to take
There's
some time.
systemic things happening in our system, across our community college system, which I think if you read the newspaper and have for the last 10 years, there's numerous things that have gone on there. But is there a role for your institutions like Washington State and the University of Washington and others to be playing to assist the systemic issue? Like, how do we, I mean, this is a feeder program to us, right? So how do we help our partners in community college world get lifted back up? This is such a necessary thing for our communities.
Did you have a comment? on that?
Yeah, I was gonna say, two things. I'll get to your comment in just a minute. The other thing to remember about college, community college enrollment in particular, that is counter-cyclical with the economy. And so as the economy improved after the 2009 crash, then community college enrollments were naturally starting to decline because that's a natural tendency, but then it hit COVID. And now it's like the cliff has been breached for some reason that people are still trying to understand, because this is a national phenomenon. The second thing is, you're right, we have to look at the community college system as a feeder into WSU, which means that there has to be a reciprocal partnership. And so we've been working hard to build MOUs, memorandums of understanding and things to help bring students, especially from our strongest traditional feeder schools. Clark College and Vancouver have had a strong partnership, but also Pullman has identified other institutions around the state, Yakima Valley or Yakima Community College now, and others, Spokane Falls, Spokane Community Colleges, to really try to build those partnerships to build enrollment coming our way. But that's going to require outside of the box thinking, because we really need to be doing more advising at those sites for students to get them prepared for that transition. And to allow them to see themselves at a four-year institution, because many of them see the community college as a destination. We want to see them pushing beyond that with their vision.
Do you think there's correlation to being 49th in the country around completing FAFSA?
Yeah.
I mean, and that,
Yeah.
I think that there's a role for the private sector to play in particular, speaking from the financial sector. Something that we're really looking at is how do we become the champions in these, in particular, rural communities that we serve and are the last financial institution left in Brewster, Washington, and Republic and Kettle Falls. How do we open our doors up and become experts at having students and families come, and we as bankers help them complete a FAFSA form, so that we could perhaps get them into the system. But there is something there that the private sector has got to lean into. Laura, or go ahead, Laura, and then.
Okay.
Fred.
How much of this is a financial issue, and especially now with inflation going wild? Because what I've found in just talking to people in the Tri-Cities community is that the Washington College grant program seems like the best kept secret. And the FAFSA certainly is a huge issue, but I just wonder how many of these students think they can't afford college, but really could under that program.
Yeah, I would tell you that that is a huge issue with students trying to find out about higher ed, is being stopped by the cost, the perceived cost, and not understanding, especially in Washington, all the help that's available. But I'll caution you, you could make college free tomorrow, and it won't mean that students will show up and knock down our doors, because it's more complex than just simply having money. But the idea that many of our own students don't realize what is out there is prevalent. We just did a study, and I'm taking a break from my presentation. We just did a study, and one of the findings was how we are conveying our cost does not resonate with the public at large. We get really low scores for it. A competitor school, virtually the same cost, gets very high marks for their pricing. They cost almost identical to us, but there is something in the way they've chosen to offer their value proposition or convey the cost that seems to resonate with the public. So we know there's work to be done there, but cost is an issue. Not understanding what's available is really the issue.
There was an article, I think it was in the Wall Street Journal last night, that is some company that makes a lot of instructional materials, and they're seeing their stock stuff go down. Anyway, they talked about this very thing, is why aren't more students going to, education? And they said they're just choosing to go into the workforce because not that college costs too much. They're just saying, well, inflation's going up, I'll go ahead and work now. And so I think data is starting to creep out about why people are making the decisions. And I think it's gonna be interesting to see over the next 3 or 4 months, because we think it's affecting us, our college, like we started, the community college colleagues that rely on a lot of those folks are just seeing that bottom drop out. And so I think I'm worried about what it does for the economy in the state 5 years from now. You know, before we leave this, I
I
just
just
want
wanted, can we let Brett? I'm
Oh,
sorry.
I didn't see Brett had his hand up.
Brett had his hand up.
No, it was just Regent Powell and Shower hit on some strategic ideas, and I was intrigued by what you said. We want to be the flagship of the 2+2 idea, but I don't want to be dependent on 2+2. I want to have our strategy be, we want to be that 4 years ago. Maybe some of the community college numbers are suffering because we've got it in 4-year programs early on. I want to be that person too. I was just throwing out that in our strategic plan.
Can I ask one thing? What are we not doing to explain this well?
Well, let's, you know what, I think that probably will be something that even Phil might be talking about too, so wanting
Because
to
it's
ensure.
joint, it's joint
Yeah.
between Phil and
Yeah.
Saichi stuff.
Okay.
Um,
And also,
All right.
I want them to be able to get to what we're trying to do
Yeah,
explicitly
yeah.
to address this.
My only comment before we leave this is it's nice to look at black numbers and go, oh, sure. I just want our chancellors, Saichi's team, all of our admission staff, people have worked extremely hard and diligently to get us here. And it's just easy to go, well, of course they went up. I just want to acknowledge lots of hard work by lots of people across all of our campuses to turn this around from where the direction was heading. And so just sometimes we don't pause and acknowledge the success, and we need to on this. So that's all. Thank you.
Yeah, let me just add, and I've heard the president use this, and so I use it all the time with my team, is our recovery will not be a perfectly shaped V. That's absolutely true in these numbers. It'll come back to us in drips and drabs, probably for another year or so. We talked about transfers. Hope springs eternal here. We are still working on this, and we'll continue this right through summer. And I'm going to end my comments looking now further out into fall 2023. So the first thing up there is the Common App. And if you're not familiar with the Common App, but you know somebody who may have applied for college in the last 3 to 5 years, I guarantee you, they know what the Common App is. First question from Elizabeth Chilton to me when she hired me was, do you know what the Common App is? I said, yes. And she said, my son wonders why we aren't in the Common App. We looked at this a year ago, and then I chose not to pursue it for the domestic students because of, remember I said I wanted a fast start. I didn't want another new application 2 years in a row for admissions. International programs asked if they could continue, and of course we supported that. It's been very helpful to them. They also laid some of the groundwork. We anticipate both non-resident and resident students using the Common App. We'll have our native app as well, so we'll have 2 ways. In Washington alone, 16,000 students use the Common App. What's interesting about that number, there's only one public school currently in the Common App in Washington, and that's Evergreen, the smallest school in the public system. All the others are private schools. In August, when we start, the University of Washington will start, Western Washington will start, Central will start. They all made the decision after we did to go into the Common App. UW has to because their current system is actually going offline, and so they have to bring this new one up. Second item there, I call.
Huge. That's a big deal.
Yeah.
I just, thank you. As a parent of 3 kids who completed the Common App in the last 3 years, that's a big deal because it was a head scratcher why nobody in the state was allowing us to use it. I mean, we used it in California and Arizona. And guess where my kids ended up? Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, can you define this? For
Yeah,
those of us
'cause I
who
wanna know
don't
what it is.
what a Common App
The
is?
Common App is a proprietary system that allows a student to apply to multiple schools with one application.
Oh, okay.
And so
Great.
we looked at it, as I said, a year ago and then chose not to do it. I didn't want to complicate how we wanted to start fall. But then we picked it up again this year, and we're first up. August 1, it goes live, and we do anticipate an uptick. We initially looked at it to help our non-resident application numbers, because those were flagging. And the states that we attract non-residents from also happen to be among the top users of the Common App, California, Texas, and Colorado. And so those are among our top 5 schools for out-of-state students. But the more we looked at it, the more we realized it's going to help in-state students as well, because many of them will choose one application to apply to multiple. And then in just an ironic twist, the other public schools being in the Common App actually helps all the public schools in the Common App.
Desiree gave me a little heads up that we only have about 20 minutes or 25 minutes. So.
I'm going to end right here and just say collaboration, 2 things about that. In a system that you want enrollment management to have traction, you have to have collaboration. So I'm going to give you 2 examples. The first are the 2 studies I alluded to. They were done system-wide. Enrollment management funded them, but they were really for marketing and enrollment management for all the campuses. I think there's a lot of information that's going to help both enrollment and marketing. And the second collaboration is from the Faculty Senate. So for years, Washington State has had an admissions subcommittee. About 2 months ago, Christine Horn, Doug Call, David Turnbull got together with my team, and they proposed, we didn't, they proposed a new structure, admissions and enrollment committee. And that, I think, speaks really well to sort of how we're trying to position enrollment across WSU. And I'm really grateful that they did that and will help us with that. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Bill.
Right. Thank you, Seiichi. I've not gotten a chance to speak in front of the Board of Regents, so I'm Bill Davis. I've been at WSU, it will be 21 years in August. So as I say, my job is almost old enough to drink. I am the interim vice provost for academic engagement and student achievement. I've been with Elizabeth now for just a little bit under a year. And what I wanted to talk about today was system-wide student success. And despite the pandemic, I think what we found is that it's opened up a lot of opportunities and a lot of opportunities for thinking about new ways of engaging with student success at WSU, and especially as we move into a system level perspective for what we do in the provost's office. So I've split this up into 3 themes for you. I've started with student exploration, because one of the things that we do to ensure student success is that we make sure that we provide students opportunities to get engaged and to explore their interests. And that's one of the strengths of bringing students to an R1 institution like WSU. What I've also done is I've tried to give you a timeline for a 4-year student career from entry, which is part of what Seiichi and his team do, all the way to post-graduation and career, to show you that really student success is holistic. It spans the entire 4-year career of a student, including the time before they get here sometimes, and especially the time after they get here. And I know Ellen's going to talk a lot more about this as well, about some of the efforts over there. But from an academic perspective, some of the things that we do to help build student success is we have the Common Reading Program, which is a way that we can help build community, especially in 1st-year introductory courses within the UCORE program. So the Common Reading book for next year will be Braiding Sweetgrass. Robin Wall, the author, will be giving a presentation in January that will be all university. You all are invited to that. I hear that there are going to be watch parties in different locations as well, if you'd like to engage with others. So we're really excited about that. And right now we're planning on having at least 90 different in-person and virtual engagements that are related to that book, because it does touch on very, very important thematic issues that are facing our community, our state, and our country. Our Spring Career Expo, one of the advantages of going back face-to-face for this last year is that we got to do our Career Expo in person for the first time in 2 years. We also were able to do virtual Career Expo, so we had a hybrid program this year. In February 2022, Amanda Morgan and her team put on a Career Expo that included 156 different employees from across the state. And we had over 1,150 WSU students from across the system, including all of our campuses, participate in in those events. So 73% of the employers who were there were seeking student interns. I think a lot of them found really high quality candidates for those positions. And 100% of the people who showed up as employers actually had positions available. So there's an advantage to the Great Resignation, is that people are starting to restock and they're seeing WSU as a destination to come and get high quality candidates for those positions. The second part of student success that I want to touch on has to do with the second theme, which is about student persistence and student retention at the university. As you probably read in the literature, there are a whole host of things that are going on with students right now as a result of the pandemic. One of them has to do with mental health and mental health concerns, but that's not just true for students, that's true for a lot of us as well. To use the pandemic as a leverage point, what we decided to do was the Academic Success and Career Counseling Center, which is run by Therese King in DESA, went on ahead and worked with the Faculty Senate to get in place a pilot project for the fall semester. Academic Rule 38B, I know you all read the catalog like I do, and you know that by heart. But basically what Rule 38B did prior to the pandemic was it said that any first semester student who earned below a 1.0 GPA was automatically recessed from the university for a semester, which means that they leave the university and for all intents and purposes, we effectively lose communication with them. That doesn't seem like a good strategy for retention, and it has a whole host of equity issues associated with it. So we decided to try a pilot, and we're currently gathering information about the results of this because it's a year-long effort, right? I can tell you what happened in the spring with this, but we went on ahead and implemented this. And so we stopped this recession of students at the end of their fall semester. I will give you data for WSU Pullman because it's what we know the most of, and it's where the majority of students were who fell into this program. We had 236 first-year students who fell under a lower than 1.0 GPA. One of the things that was nice about this program is it was a very high touch program. So each one of the students who came back and wanted to re-enroll, and of that 236, we had 166 or 70% of those students who wanted to come back, right? These are students that we would have just lost most likely. We were able to interview them and find out what are the barriers that they faced last fall. And as you can imagine, returning back to a face-to-face educational environment, all of the environments that they had been occupying for the last year, being at home. Some of our students were homeless for periods of time last year, and other challenges they faced. We were able to hone in on those and learn from them. What are the current challenges of WSU students? So far, the pilot has been a reasonable success. At midterm of this last semester, 44% of our students were making satisfactory academic progress out of that group. So about 80 students have been retained and are on their way to a 4-year degree. What we're doing right now is we're honing and refining this. We've got some good best practices that we've learned about additional supports that students are probably going to need. And those aren't going to go away. The pandemic is going to have a very long tail. And what we're learning from this project, I think, is really going to serve us well whenever it comes to finding new and innovative ways at WSU to help support all of our students and whatever challenges they happen to come and face with us. Another thing in that theme about student persistence and retention, from a system level perspective, I wanted to share a story out of the Everett campus. They have been working really hard on recovery efforts for students who have academic holds. Mark Beatty, who's a BCAA there, and his team have been really working on this. They've developed a communication campaign that encourages support for students to return that next semester. So it's a high touch program, which is what's necessary. Every student's story is a little bit different, and their needs and in terms of support are going to be different. This program at Everett has been able to boost graduation and retention rates from 73% up to 86% in just 1 year. So we've made a 10% or more increase in retention at that campus. We're looking at this right now as a model for things that could be implemented at other campuses as well in order to learn those best practices and move this program forward. And Mark is collecting data with his team moving into the next academic year as well. Another story out of that, that second theme about persistence and retention is the Office of Academic Engagement, College Success Programs. These support low-income and first-generation students. Saichi didn't, I think he probably talked to you about this, but this is a really important growing demographic in the college-age population. First-generation low-income students are the fastest growing group that are going to college at this point. These programs support veterans, they support foster youth, they support STEM majors, and they support our future teachers as well. So talking about that K-12 pipeline that we need to really build. These programs have led to a 94% persistence rate for students who participate in them from year 1 to year 2, which is above the normal persistence rate that we see, about 89% in Pullman. They have 98% of these students have a satisfactory academic progress rate moving forward after that time point, which is really, really important. And we have about an 85% graduation rate from WSU out of these programs, which is much higher than what we see with other student populations. Once again, these are programs that I think we're learning important information about better practices that we could implement widely. And so we're looking at how to institutionalize and operationalize many of these.
If I could.
Yes, please.
Just to pause a little bit again, these numbers are stunningly good.
Yes.
It's easy to look and say, well, 94% year 1 to year 2. Sure, that ought to be why it's not 100%. Instead of going, wow, it's 60%. How are we just dropping these students and not supporting them? So I just want to acknowledge that these types of things, these numbers are exceptional. And if I look at other aspirational peers like University of Florida or somewhere like that, that have these, 90+% persistence rates, it's easy to blow by that and go, of course it would be that way. This is, with this population, this is stunning. It's so good. So that's great to hear.
And we're certainly hoping we can take the best practices from this and expand.
Yes.
And I think that's a key thing. If something works on one scale, how, this is the big challenge, is how do you scale it? Because sometimes these are high touch programs with a heavy staff need. But at least you say, okay, if we're going to get to this for the larger population, we have some sense of what needs to be there. So let me just ask that. What is the characteristics that you sort of see to get you these success rates in terms of, is it the people that are there? Is it making sure that some of the counselors look like and walk in the same shoes as our students? What are the things that you see as characteristics?
Yes. I mean, it's.
I'm throwing you.
I think it's
here.
I know you are. It's
Yeah.
But it's multifactorial, right? If there was a small change that you could make in a system as complex as higher education, everybody would have made it already. And so it's a lot of really small changes that add up incrementally. For those of you who don't know me, I taught a 500 student introductory biology course for 8 years. And so it was all about small incremental changes with that population as well. I think it's about diversifying our staff and our faculty. It's about allowing students to have mentors who have walked in their shoes or walked parallel paths to them at times. It's about high touch. It's about understanding student needs. So one of the things that I think is really exciting in that data is that there are opportunities there to really help our senior students. Oftentimes we think about resources for our first year students and keeping them to the second year. But what we find is that there's a lot of students who get to that 4th year and then there's this gap. And we've already used our scholarship money for other things. And they have very small needs sometimes that are huge barriers and obstacles for them as they try to get out of the institution. So we're trying to identify those and find pathways to help address those. So each population has slightly different needs. There's quite a bit of overlap between them. And what we're learning about is how to provide holistically those kinds of supports for our students and to meet them where they're at as time goes on. The last one is thinking about student success and thinking about, how is WSU positioning itself in terms of the national landscape? And what I would argue is that what we see is that WSU is providing a very high quality education to students. And in fact, we have more Goldwire scholars over the last 5 years than the University of Washington's had probably in the last 10. Okay. We've had 11. So if those of you who don't know, the Goldwire Scholarship is the highest honor that an undergraduate can really achieve in STEM disciplines. It is a very prestigious scholarship. We've had 11 of those over just the last 5 years, which is one of the highest numbers in the country, especially among R1s. In terms of Fulbright scholars, over the last 10 years, we've had 18 Fulbright scholars. So students who've gone overseas to pursue additional education at a foreign institution and come back to the United States in order to pursue higher education, usually a master's or a PhD. And then Udall Scholars is another distinguished scholarship, and we've had 3 WSU Native American students who earned this scholarship over the last 5 years. So what I'm trying to convey to everyone is just how holistic student support has to be at the academic level in order to keep students moving forward and helping them pursue their dreams of getting a degree from WSU, but more importantly, how do they move on into that high impact career and service that they want to have after they get done at the institution.
Thank you, Bill.
I will go. I have but one slide, so I will talk for fairly briefly.
Oh,
But
you're awesome.
I can cut it to a nutshell, right? Actually, I'm going to take off on what Bill was talking about, and really those programs that are high impact and high touch, as President Schultz said. It's really such a critical element in retaining students and helping them march all the way through their academic career to eventually to that successful graduation and degree. So I'm just highlighting a couple of system-wide programs that fall in that retention and really fall under the care area. Bill was talking really in that academic space. I'm talking in the care space. We're talking as if they're separate. They're not. Our students are whole human beings, and what they're experiencing in the classroom and what they're experiencing outside the classroom, just like the rest of us, what we're experiencing in our career and what we're experiencing in our personal lives, you really can't thread them apart. So a couple of things I wanted to highlight. One is our student care network that we have really built up over the last 2 to 4 years, I would say. This is a system-wide system, I'm going to use that word twice, where any faculty member, staff member, or student can submit a report about a student they're concerned about. And this is really a best practice nationally, to have a real easy way for someone to say, hey, I'm a faculty member and I've noticed that this really well-performing student is suddenly dropping off in terms of their academic performance, or they're not showing up for class and that's unusual. Or a roommate of someone and they're a little bit unsure how to address the roommate who seems to be withdrawing and spending all of their time in their room when they used to be more outgoing. Or the reverse, a student who's been kind of steady is suddenly acting very erratic and raising concerns. This is just an opportunity to submit that report. It can be done anonymously, although we encourage people to identify so that we can connect with them and get more information. And really, this falls under that category of early intervention being key to helping a student who may be about to head down a path that is going to interfere with their academic success and their life success, to get in there early, figure out what is it that's going on, and get them connected up with the resources that they need. And again, system-wide, so we have care teams on every campus. They go through annual training together so that they are sharing sort of their practices are consistent from campus to campus, and they also rely on each other to consult if a situation comes up over the course of the year. You know, if you're at Tri-Cities and you sort of have a situation, you know, you've got colleagues throughout the system to say, how do I best support this student? This is maybe a situation I haven't seen before, or I don't know what to do with.
Ellen, can I ask, maybe this is a question, Dave, that you could speak to? I mean, what is the likelihood and where's faculty around having a pulse point on students that might truly be in trouble? I mean, that's a lot of students that you guys are, you know, educating and interfacing with in a very short amount of time and then trying to get to the next thing. So what does that look like from a faculty standpoint?
I think I utilized that earlier this week.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the faculty has pretty good handle on that.
Okay.
Yeah,
And they're
absolutely.
aware of like these really good.
I don't know that they're aware of studentcare.wsu.edu necessarily. But I think the faculty are ready and willing, absolutely. And they have a pretty good finger on the pulse of things. Yes, absolutely. I mean, what's your perspective on the faculty?
I was gonna say, I'll go personal, local, and immediate first and say, I used it every semester in my class. My teaching assistants and I were on the lookout for things that would fit into that, and I made sure that they were trained to use the system. And we've used it multiple times a semester, and it's led to as good of outcomes as you would hope from some of the situations that we face. I know in my college, I come from the College of Veterinary Medicine, we talked about the care network every semester at the beginning of the semester to remind instructors that it was available to them. And instructors go to their associate deans and their chairs sometimes with these issues and say, you know, is this rise to the level of the care network? And if yes, then they would want ahead and submit something. I don't know how many reports y'all process, but I was probably responsible for quite a few.
Yeah, we've got some with a little red flag on it. I'm kidding.
What about teaching assistants? You say your teaching assistants are aware, but they often have more personal view of the students because they're smaller groups.
Absolutely.
Are they getting a strong training and awareness?
We had an annual training for teaching assistants in my program, and yes, they were instructed on how to use it. And then I think in a lot of the, you know, where teaching assistants are going to be used most often are in large enrollment introductory class, at least in Pullman, large enrollment introductory courses, and most of those would have a TA training, you know, at the beginning of the semester. And that was certainly, yeah, we talk about lab safety, but we're going to talk about mental health and other types of resources.
Well, I think that's great. I mean, years ago, when I was a teaching assistant, we didn't have that. And I had a straight A student who disappeared, and sadly he had committed suicide. And it had a huge impact on me.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think this is a wonderful program.
Yeah, I think, you know, probably the awareness varies a little bit from college to college. Our Dean of Students, I'll give a shout out to Dr. Jill Creighton, who does a terrific job of trying to get out there and ensure that deans, professors, faculty and associate deans, and also academic advisors. I think many of our reports come from academic advisors who have a really different kind of relationship with students, may not see them as often, but may hear more from the student because they're not in an evaluative role with relation to the student. And so they may hear from that student that something is going on, may hear directly. So, we will never achieve perfection, but we are working constantly at making sure every member of our WSU communities knows about the care network and knows to access it and knows that the bar is fairly low. We would much rather hear about a student and say, really minimal intervention needed, than to not hear about a student because a faculty or staff member was nervous about submitting a report. And that is something we have to work at. They're sometimes nervous about, oh, am I going to get the student in trouble? That's why we call it the student care network, really emphasizing it's a care function. I know.
Any other questions or comments?
Just one more question. So you mentioned this is a system-wide. So that's a lot of campuses, that's a lot of people that could potentially be inputting into the system. How are you managing kind of the volume? And are you seeing inputs from across the system, or is it more Pullman focused? And is it handled more on a local basis?
It is largely handled on a local basis because it's a system-wide group, but each campus has its own care network or care team. Actually, it has a care team that is tied into the care network is probably the best way to say that. So it's one database. So we're collecting data. And that also means if a student transfers from one of our campuses to another, and we've got information about them, we don't lose that this is a student who may need extra support and so on. So we've got teams on each campus, they train together and they stay in touch over the course. So that's how the volume is managed, is that each campus is managing it sort of relative to their population. Yeah. I'll just spend 1 minute. You all have heard about Protocol Plus before by way of our presentations in the Student Affairs and Student Life subcommittee or committee. But I just wanted to bring it up because I think it's another really perfect example of a system-wide effort. We are in the contracting process right now with this vendor. Contracting is always more complicated than we want it to be, but that just is what it is. And I am excited about this. This will touch all of our students and provide resources for them, including our students in Global Campus and at our research and extension centers. It means every COOG will have some access to support in that mental health territory, which is just integral to retaining them and supporting them all the way across to graduation. I really want to, I'm not going to name them by name. We have been meeting for 3 years. I have had participants from every campus in Zoom meetings over the course. We were doing Zoom before Zoom was a thing, and working on this. And just trust me, at my house, there will be a bottle of champagne opened when this is live, because it has been a long project and I think it's going to be transformative. So more about that hopefully in the future when we have data on how well it's doing. So I will open it up now for, I know I think went over.
No, you're totally fine. We
Okay, got it.
onto the chapters.
Good.
On the protocol, there's crisis services, tools, peer support, and the referral network. But, you know, I think that the referral network is the kiss of death for a lot of people, because you just go into a referral network and that your general practitioner puts you in and has diagnosed you that perhaps you have anxiety or depression. Now you need to actually be medicated or get assistance in that. And then you go in and find out it's a 6-month wait before you can see a mental health professional that can actually prescribe and assist. So how does that work inside that for students?
Let me tell you what the referral network is actually, in some ways, it's the one I'm least excited about of the 4 in this suite of services. It will probably be more helpful to the care providers, whether they're mental health providers or academic advisors or others who are supporting students on each of our campuses, because they may be working with a student. The student says, I'm going home for the summer, and home is Nebraska. How can I continue to see someone? I've had a counselor here in my local community, but how can I get connected up with someone at home? And so that referral network is going to be really helpful with staff, especially to work with students to ensure that they have access to continuing care if they need it, or if they're graduating. And we want to be sure that they've got something, again, going to the point that we want to support them after graduation as well. So a student can go into the referral network and look to find a provider themselves. I think it's the least robust of the 4 sort of functions in the suite of services. The one I'm most excited about, I'll just say, is the peer support. That is an anonymous peer support territory where students can go in and interact. One of the things we're hearing from other campuses that already have this in place is that it's called Together All, and that peer support space, which is monitored by a trained professional, which is good for safety purposes, tends to be used by students who are more reluctant to seek out services in person on our campuses. So it's more likely to be used by students of color, by queer identified students, and also by students who are experiencing something that they're just ashamed or have never talked about with anyone before. And in that anonymous peer space, they can say, hey, here's a thing that happened to me. They're expecting pushback or a negative reaction. And what they often find is that they get a very supportive reaction. And that starts breaking that silence, which in the mental health world is huge. So
How does that work?
how does
The peer support, I mean, is it a hotline or?
it is more like a chat room, actually. So
Oh.
students can go in 24/7 and engage with, and it will involve students. It won't just be students at WSU. It sort of creates a sort of, and I don't know completely the technology behind it, but it is more like a chat room where they can go in and find support from peers. It's monitored. So if someone has to have a certain, their email address has to be, for example, wsu.edu, but it might be, I don't know what Nebraska's .edu is, but I'm making that up. But so it is for students only.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, may I suggest that Faculty Senate have you come in and speak to the Senate next year, specifically in regard to the Student Care Network, and we can kind of re-engage Faculty Senate and Student Affairs in this next academic year.
Sign me up.
Okay.
That's great. Thank you for the offer. Other questions for Chi or Bill or Ellen here?
You know what, just to put a fine point on it, you know, all of the work that they described in the second half of the presentation is really designed at student retention and of course, student success and graduation. You know, oftentimes with the numbers, we tend to focus on who's applying, who's coming in, but it's as important, if not more important, that once they commit to us and we commit to them, that we're providing them to support to get to graduation or whatever their goal is. So I just want to thank all three of you for the work that you do, and it's clear that they've been collaborating together, which is really critical part of making this work.
These are two of my favorite
Thank you.
colleges.
Thank you.
I think that it's easy to take the collaboration for granted, but I think this is something that I'll give Elizabeth, all of the folks up there, great credit for, is we're trying to break down some longstanding institutional barriers around a lot of places around the country. There's these artificial, weird barriers between sometimes academic affairs and student affairs, sometimes deservedly so, but many times it comes back to personalities and things like that. But trying to really break those down and make sure that all of our professionals working on student retention writ large are collaborating. We're not duplicating efforts artificially because of the BP they report to. So there's been a lot of work that goes into this, and you get down 3 layers. People just want to help the students, but we also need leadership at the top acknowledging and supporting, you know, when you have this sort of collaboration back and forth. So, you know, Ellen, Bill, and Saichi, you guys have set a lot of the tone that's also needed, so that we really are focused on our students and not so much where somebody is in the org chart. And that sounds trivial, but it has not been, and there's a lot of work that's gone into that by leadership.
Well, when you're trying to land a helicopter in the middle of gotta need everybody's help.
I didn't know I was getting on a helicopter, just saying.
Very good.
So I know we got a minute or two left. I want to ask each of the 3 of you, if you can wave a magic wand and do something today to help with this, what would you do?
Got started that in.
We would begin in a big way weaning ourselves off tuition waivers to incentivize enrollment and utilize foundation money to do the same.
We would find and operationalize the resources that are needed to take those best practices and really institutionalize them and move them to that next level where they're serving more and more students at the university.
We would have every student be able to say, that's the person at the university who knows who I am and knows what I want and knows what I care about, whether that's an advisor or an instructor or a counselor. Every student would know that there's one person who knows them by name and cares what they're about. Because that
was
means
great
they
rapid
graduate.
fire.
Yeah.
Wow, you guys are
Wow.
rock stars. So thank you. WSU is very lucky. Our students are incredibly lucky to have you. So thank you.
Thank
Great
you.
presentation. We're gonna do, I think we'll take a quick 10-minute break. Be back here no later than like 10:35, because then we are going to dive in with Phil and spend an hour with Phil talking about marketing and communications. Thanks. from our break, and at this time, we will be hearing from our Vice President for Marketing and Communications, Phil Weiler. He's going to be providing us a university communication update. As you all know, this is a topic that we continue to visit about around how we tell the story and the amazing things that are happening at WSU. I would like to just again say thank you to Phil for taking our feedback and our comments. You're very gracious. And you know, everybody's a marketer. I always say that, being a marketing and communications person for a career for the last 30 years, everybody knows how to do it, by the way. It's not that hard. So you just, sometimes it requires patience and just an openness. Phil demonstrated that, so thank you. And with that, I'm just going to turn it to you, Phil.
Sure, thank you. And I want to echo something that the president started with this morning. He talked about the value of the advice and counsel that we receive from you all. That's what I'm looking for today, is I really want us to be able to have a conversation. If you recall, we did start this discussion back in January, and our time ran short. We didn't have an opportunity to hear from you all. I talked a lot, and really I wanted to hear from you. So this is our opportunity to revisit the conversation that we started back in January, and we have good news to share, things that we've made progress in the time since we last talked in January. So I only have a few slides. As I said, I really want us to focus mostly on the discussion. I have a couple questions at the end that I hope can serve as prompts so we can hear from you all. Before we jump into the conversation, however, the president did ask that I spend just a minute to give you a recap on the work that was done to announce the really generous gift that Washington State University received from Schweitzer Engineering Laboratories. As you recall, on April 18th, we announced a $20 million gift from Schweitzer Engineering, from Ed and Bea Schweitzer, and from Schweitzer Engineering, the corporation. This is one of the largest gifts in the history of Washington State University. And from a communications perspective, that's a very newsworthy hook. We really wanted to make sure that when we promoted this gift, we made sure people understood this is one of the largest gifts in the history of our institution. WSU's been around for 130 years, and so this truly was a historic announcement that we were making. So we spent a lot of time in a very short 10-day period. We had a very short period of time to put together a plan and execute it. We worked very closely with our colleagues at Schweitzer. I have to say it was a wonderful experience to be able to work with the staff at Schweitzer to really put together a comprehensive both media marketing plan and news media plan. So let me talk a little bit about what we saw and what our goals were. There were two major goals that we had from the media perspective. We wanted to be able to secure coverage in at least one Associated Press membered news outlet, because if you can get into the AP, chances are your story is going to get distributed pretty broadly, and you can see pick up, we hoped, statewide. The other thing we wanted to do was, we felt this might be a little bit of a stretch, but we wanted to garner coverage in at least one television station in the Seattle market. And the reason that's a challenge is because Seattle crews weren't going to travel to Pullman for this announcement, but so we were thinking about how we might be able to use local affiliates and encourage them to share coverage and share with their colleagues in Seattle that this was an important story. So let me talk a little bit about the results that we saw. When we discussed this last in January, remember we talked about there's earned media, owned media, shared media, and paid media. Earned media is the media, the coverage that you get generated by mainstream news outlets. So we managed to have to garner 159 news stories, independent news stories about this announcement, which is a great result. We not only got the statewide coverage on the print side, but we actually got national reach because we managed to get this placed with Yahoo News, and Yahoo News has a huge reach. You'll see that the potential reach for this story was 71.5 million readers. So we were really pleased on the print and digital side. Now let's take a look quickly at the broadcast side. Television, I have to give credit to my team. they hit this one out of the park as well. Managed to get coverage on all 3 Seattle network television affiliates. We got coverage on all 3 Spokane network television affiliates, on the ABC affiliate in Yakima and the CBS affiliate in Lewiston. And again, the challenge here not only was the issue about if you're in television news, you need footage. A voiceover is not a very interesting story. So we were able to work with assignment editors and let them know we can't tell you the details because we did not want to share what the amount of the gift was before we made the announcement. There were a couple of reasons why it was important to SEL in particular that they be able to share with their staff the fact that they were making that gift before WSU announced it. So we had to work with the relationships we had in place with these assignment editors to say, trust us when we tell you this is a story that you're going to want to pay attention to. And that paid off. So those relationships were really helpful. Northwest Public Broadcasting on the radio side picked this up. They have a statewide reach. We also got coverage in the the NPR affiliate in Tacoma as well. So on the broadcast side, very, very pleased. And again, it's a tribute to Dave Wasson, who's our Director of News and Information. Dave worked his relationships with these assignment editors. They had trust in him. They believed him when he told them this was an important story for WSU and for the state. Then on to paid media. Paid media is not something we typically have the ability to do, but again, because this was such a big news story for the university, we wanted to invest and really be able to leverage things on the paid side. So we talked about in January, paid is the way you deliver the message and earned should be the way you support that message. It felt good for us to be able to really use that equation the way it should be used, which is to really put a lot of emphasis on the paid side. So one of the things we did is we took out a full page ad in the Seattle Times. You can see a copy of that ad on the screen. That ad ran a week ago Tuesday in the Seattle Times. As part of that buy, we also received 350,000 impressions on their various digital properties. The other thing we did is a paid social media campaign. And this was kind of a 2-pronged approach. One of the first things we did was we obviously posted this news on all of our WSU accounts, but then we boosted those posts to anybody within the state of Washington, make sure that Washingtonians were really aware of this. On top of that, we also did a flight of 3 separate paid social media ads that were highly targeted. And these looked at a Seattle-based audience. So if you lived in the Seattle region, you were more likely to see this ad. If you were a WSU donor, someone who might be willing and interested to either support this project or a future project, we worked to make sure that we got this information served up in their feeds. Then we also reached out to stakeholders who were members of the advisory council for the Boylan College of Engineering and Architecture. It's important that their supporters and stakeholders were aware of this. So before I move on, any questions about Schweitzer Engineering Labs announcement?
Yeah, how much did that full page announcement the Seattle Times cost?
That's about $8,000.
That's all?
Yeah, it's not a lot. So yeah, it was definitely in this situation the absolute right thing to do. Yeah.
Well, your social media, I think you're targeted and segmented approach to those 3 audiences, but those were the right audiences. So well done on that.
For the
Yeah.
television stations, what did you provide them visually?
So what we did was we were able to get crews from the region to come, and then we talked with the assignment editors at those stations and the assignment editors in the Seattle market to say your affiliate has been on site. They have a package that they can share with you. So we encouraged them to share content, which they did. And it's worth noting that not only did we get coverage, but we got coverage on multiple newscasts on all of the stations. So it wasn't sort of a one and done, because sometimes you might be on the early newscast, but not make it to the evening, the late evening newscast.
Well, and how did the Schweitzer community and stakeholders feel it went? And have you shared the information with them as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I will speak for them. I think it's safe to say they were very pleased. As I said, it was a lot of fun. You know, sometimes when you have a big project in a very short period of time to do it, you have to be really focused and you can come up with great results. I think this is an example. We were meeting with Schweitzer staff at least every other day, if not, well, in reality, we were meeting daily, probably in some cases, multiple times a day. But the large group, there was a group of WSU folks and a group of Schweitzer engineering staff, and we met every other day for 2 weeks to pull this off. The other thing too is I think this is a credit not just to, certainly not just to my team, it's a credit to WSU as a whole, because we were working with our colleagues at the foundation. They did a fantastic job. We were working with colleagues at the college. There were a lot of different people who had expertise who really came together, formed a team, worked hard, put together a great plan, and then executed the plan, and the results were better than I think any of us expected. The other thing I didn't mention is we knew that Schweitzer Engineering Labs had trade publications that they would want to share this information with, and so of course we did that as well. Most of those are what we would refer to as long leads, so they don't publish necessarily the same day. They might have a monthly magazine, so we expect to see continued coverage over time. The other, I'll just, since we're on that, the other thing we did too is this is an important philanthropic announcement, and so there are several trade publications that focus on philanthropy. We want to make sure they were aware of this this gift as well.
I wanted Jeanette to know the announcement was actually on the Schweitzer corporate campus, so they were instrumental in how the message was structured, as well as one of the takeaways I was unaware of is how many WSU grads are funneled into Schweitzer, and the way he viewed it as an investment.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, no, I'm sure we collaborated up front. I was just curious if they were pleased with the outcome as well as we are.
Yeah, we were very much in lockstep with one another. It was a joint team to put this together.
So, Bill, before you move beyond this, part of, I think, some of our discussion that I've had with some of the regents just over the last year would be, well, we just don't tell our story very well. And then the other part of that was, is our team capable of telling our story well? It's not just performance, is do we have even the right people in place? And so one of the reasons I wanted Phil to talk about this today, and I'd like, before you move on, I'd like the regents to continue to discuss this, is this, I think, is a demonstration that with spending some money, taking something that was significant, we can be more strategic in the Seattle market. We can do it in a professional way. We did a collaborative way. We can't do this for everything. But on the other hand, you could say, the board, could say, we expect you to do this for 5 or 6 major things per year, where you're buying, you're working professionally, you're getting on TV, you're getting in print, all these different things. So what I'd like to hear from our colleagues is, you've seen the data. What do you like about this? If there's something you say, well, I think you might have missed here a little bit, I'd like to hear that, because what we want to do is put together a little bit of a sense of, okay, if you can do this 5 or 6 times a year, this will represent a positive step for WSU in storytelling broadly around the state.
One thing that, well, I'm curious, did you shoot video of the announcement, and are you repurposing that?
Yes.
And
So
how are you doing that?
sure. So yes, absolutely. We live streamed the event because we knew that in particular there were advocates for the college who would not be able to physically travel because they're located around the country. So, and interestingly enough, we had as many people on the live stream as we had physically in the room. We had about 170 people in the room, and I think about 160 or 170 on the live stream. But in addition to that, we had both our WSU photographer as well as our video team on site. Those of you familiar with Schweitzer Engineering Labs, they have facilities around the world, and every Friday they do a lunch, which is sort of their opportunity to share corporate information with employees globally. We knew that they were having, that they do these Friday lunches, and this was the kind of information that they would want to share. So we shot, the event was on a Tuesday. We shot a video, delivered it by Thursday, so to them, so that they would then have assets to be able to share for their Friday lunches. And that was also the asset we used for our paid social media campaign. We know that video is definitely king with regard to social. We would not have gotten the engagement that we saw if we didn't have video. So we actually, as I mentioned, we've got a flight of 3 different ads. This is a fairly nuanced story. There's a lot of information there, and so it wasn't a message we could deliver in just one ad. So we have a series of ads that kind of compound and build on the story and explain what was happening and why it's important, not only for WSU but for SEL. But yeah, video is the core of that campaign, because we know that's what it's going to attract.
Can I get a link to those ads? I'd like to see it.
I'm sorry, say again?
I'd like to get a link to see them if that's
Absolutely.
possible.
Sure.
And the other question is that now that this is done, I don't know if it's a question as much as it may be a suggestion, is taking something like this and using it almost as a kind of proof of performance. And that in the sense of, okay, if you have the Schweitzer people that are there, you can then, why did they do this? You know, and you can continue to tell the story and build it as a story. And, you know, not only the fact that, you know, they're investing because they have a lot of people from WSU that they depend on, but, you know, the personal side of the story, particularly from the person that gave you the money. And then there's another way of continuing that. And I think it can also be part of any philanthropic effort that you're going to make, and you continue to use that. And you're building your own case about investing in WSU and what you're getting at it. So they tell their personal story about why that's important. And so if you shot that footage, you've got those things, you can repurpose that, you can continue telling that story.
Yeah, and that really was our intent, is we took all the footage, boiled it down to about a 60 to 90 second video, I don't know the exact length runtime, but really that was what we were trying to do, was to demonstrate why was this done, and with an eye toward prospective donors. Why would you want to be an investor at WSU? Why did this individual, this couple, and this company decide to invest? And why should you do the same? And that's part why we targeted people we know who might have the needs to be able to be investors in future projects.
Yeah, so I'm so excited about everything that's been done to share this gift. I just want to pause for a moment and just say, overall, the whole team to make this happen, because you're telling the story and amplifying the gift. The gift is a series of so many other steps that occurred, and I don't want to miss that moment either, which is a tremendous moment, and I hope that we'll continue to celebrate that even over the next couple of days. What I heard you say, Phil, was this ongoing storytelling campaign. So it's not one ad, it's not one, digital targeted print or social media campaign. It's a series of storytelling opportunities. And that's what I think I'm most excited about. And Kirk, your comment about, the idea that it's not just the people in the right positions, it's the resources to do the work, it's the stories to tell, it's being able to do all of that together. And it feels to me like this is a great example of the power that we have in this moment to tell the story. And so I'd love to be able to understand kind of what that plan looks like on a more holistic basis. So, this was a big event. Hopefully we have more. We continue to have these big opportunities to share this story, but there are small stories too. And I just wanted to share, because marketing and communications is so tied into whether it's faculty and staff retention or enrollment, and, just being, I think, the leader in healthcare and equity and all of the things that WSU stands for. I had a superintendent in Vancouver make a comment recently. One of the things I want to do at the Vancouver Public Schools is tell more stories about the people, like WSU does with their stories of their athletes. And I thought, well, that's really interesting that here's someone kind of outside of kind of the system that I'm in right now, who sees that we're still telling stories of people. And I think that is what Regent Cerna is also mentioning. Like, I am curious about, why did those two donors decide that they wanted to invest? I suspect that the other Dr. Schultz had some leeway in helping to convince them that this is a good opportunity to lean in here. But I think you're doing a really good job of telling the people's story and the way that we're leading. And I'd love to hear a little bit from you in terms of, if I have the right people and I have the right resources and I'm able to use this as a good case study, what does a year or a 3-year plan look like where I have these moments and then I have just steady storytelling? And what do you need from us to help support you to do it?
Well, that's a perfect introduction to the next section. If you don't mind, maybe I'll just move on because I think.
Any other comments or feedback for Bill? Well done. Thank you for taking us through the exercise.
Yeah, I just have a quick question, and it just, I don't know, maybe Kirk, you can actually answer this even more. One of the things that I've always heard is like University of Washington, because they're in a space where there's so many companies with lots of wealth, that they get the big gifts, and it hasn't been the type of thing that we've gotten. But it makes me sort of think that this also, it raised awareness on the philanthropy side over in Seattle. And it just seems like it might be a nice jumping off point to expand our philanthropy.
Well, and that's exactly why we targeted folks that have either given in the past or might have the capacity to give in the future. I think the foundation talks a lot about this idea that you need to create a tradition of giving, a culture of giving. And one of the ways you do that is to say, here's someone you know who has chosen to invest in the institution. Maybe it's time for me to think about that as well. And so that's why I think in particular running the ad in the Seattle Times is really critical, not only to thank SEL and to promote WSU, but also to get those potential donors to be thinking about, this is an individual and a company that stepped up, maybe it's my turn. And I do this with an eye toward the fact that we know that there will be a large fundraising campaign that we launch in a couple of years. You need to do the spade work now so that when the time comes for you to make an ask, people have already been thinking about that and subconsciously thinking back to all the other gifts and realizing, all right, maybe it's my turn to participate as well. So I think you're absolutely right.
And this is why I was saying about repurposing this and telling a personal story of, why they decided to do this and, what prompted them, why they think of issues so special, what they're hoping to get out of it. So, it's a personal story and the connection to WSU. And then I think it also sets a foundation for what else you want to do as you go forward for other.
As Phil jumped into kind of the next section of his presentation, I think one of the things that Phil and I have spent a lot of time talking about offline, and Kirk and I are spending quite a bit of time talking about, is that, again, it's so wonderful to have everybody's ideas, and yet at the same time, we have to kind of create, and this is something Phil is looking at, but it's something that the Board of Regents is going to be talking to Kirk about with his goals, of each campus needs to identify the story they want to tell and understand how Phil can support that from a system-wide standpoint, and that there is a coordinated effort, because you can quickly throw the kitchen sink at everything, and we don't have the budget to do that. And from a marketing perspective, what is it we want to be known for in 2022? What in 2023? What are our goals? What are Kirk's goals? What are Vancouver's and Everett's and the Tri-Cities and Spokane's? And how are we going to weave the overall system story? And then also actually be the number one thing our drumbeat for this year is going to be enrollment, if that's the case, right? Because we just talked about enrollment, philanthropy, retention, best value, fundraising, personal. I mean, we just talked about 15 stories in our conversation here, and that is the world that I come from. It's my job and your job, Phil, to figure out how to say, Daryl, what's the story? Mel, what's the story, and how can I help the system beat the drum for you while I'm doing an overarching strategy, which is driving X. So.
And I absolutely agree that prioritization is important. But the value of putting together a plan is to say, all right,
Yep.
this is an important topic. We may not be able to cover it this year, but we have a plan and we'll be able to do it next year or the year after. And
How we back
right
up.
now, we don't have that plan in place to be able to, whether it's the need to talk about our research or to talk about our service to the state through extension. There's so many stories that need to be told. And so it's a matter, I agree with you. It's a matter of needing to be able to prioritize. Let me just move quickly into the next section here. So if you remember in January, we talked about kind of how we're organized around marketing and communications, and that was important to sort of level set, but really what we were hoping to do was to have that conversation with you all, and we didn't get that opportunity because of the time ran short. So if you remember, there were two recommendations that I came forward with. One was that we support a one-time funding request for a multi-year brand marketing strategy. And then the other thing was we need to have a consistent, sustainable marketing budget for the system. And that gets to that idea of being able to be planful and say, we can't do everything the first year. So if we know that we're going to have sustainable funding over a multi-year period, we can start planning out and saying, what are we going to talk about in year 2 and year 3 and the like. So I have good news to share with you all, which is that first item, the one-time funding request has been approved. And that really allows us to build the foundation that honestly WSU has needed for many, many years. Certainly for 5 years that I've been here, and I think before I was here, we really haven't been able to put together a good system-wide plan to talk about what our priorities are from a marketing and communications perspective. On one hand, 5 years is a hell of a long time for us to get to this point, but I think actually the timing is really good. And we heard from Saichi in the work. Remember a year ago, he came to us and talked about his efforts to create alignment between all of the campuses from an enrollment marketing perspective. His team has done outstanding work, and we have achieved that alignment that we need. And so I think we're primed to be able to put together that system-wide plan that, to Regent Dickinson's point, we need to have an underlying set of messages. The way I talk about this is, if you want to become a COOG, regardless of what campus you go to, what kind of an experience are you going to have? There are certain characteristics of being a COOG that cut across all of our campuses. We need as an organization to reach agreement on what those characteristics are. But then each individual campus has something unique that it brings to the table. And those campuses need to identify and coalesce around what those are. So for example, if you are a place-bound older student who might have some college and you live in the North Puget Sound area, you want to complete your degree, well, great news, Everett campus is the perfect location for you. If you want a residential experience and you're just coming out of high school, then you can look at the Pullman campus. So one of the beauties of the WSU system, I believe, is we have 6 campuses that can meet students where they are in their life experience, but also in their academic career. And we are unique in that is the real benefit of how we've organized our system. Just about every other system in the college university system in the country, you actually have competition between schools for students. They have their own brands, they have their own mascots, they have their own colors. They have their own marketing budgets, and they don't coordinate and collaborate. The beauty of our approach is we are, I think, much more collaborative. And I think we've achieved that alignment now so that we are primed to be able to talk about putting together a system-wide marketing plan that supports the system message, but then also supports individual campuses. Let me talk a little bit about how these one-time funds.
How much is that going to cost to do that first step?
So this first step, we've received funding for $350,000, which we believe will allow us to really do sort of 3 things here that we have listed. First, Saichi mentioned that he had been doing, he had, I think, very graciously funded 2 market research studies that not only benefited him, but I feel like it probably benefited me as much, if not more. We did an external perception study and a competitive analysis. So the external perception study was a quantitative survey of students, parents, educational influencers in the state of Washington, and just members of the public. We talked to folks in Washington, Oregon, and California, and basically said, when you think of Washington State University, what is your perception? there was a series of questions that went through, generated some really valuable data for us. Valuable data from a student recruitment perspective, but from a marketing perspective, that was gold for me. The other thing we did then is also had them do a content review of all the marketing and communications materials for all 6 of WSU's campuses, plus 11 other competitor campuses across the state and outside the state of Washington. And the little graphic you have up there is difficult to read. It's really more of an illustrative purpose, but it's an example of what the findings were for the Pullman campus. They looked at, rather than being quantitative, this was more qualitative, and they did a review of what does your website look like? What does your social media presence look like? What do your videos communicate? And then what do your marketing campaigns to prospective students look like? What are the messages that are being delivered? Is there consistency? If you are doing a great job as a university, you're going to have maybe 2 colors. You can see that the Pullman campus has a few more than 2. The other thing you'll see, if you sort of the upper right-hand corner there, there's that beige color. I'll step back and say the colors are based on archetypes. They use psychometrics and create different archetypes. And an archetype might be red, for example, is an archetype for enthusiasm and excitement, and I think that very much is in line with who WSU is as an institution. We're a place that has passion and loyalty and excitement.
Go Cougs.
Go Cougs, absolutely. And it happens to also be red, which is, I don't think I think that's just by chance. But the beige is a color that's something for us to look at as well, because that's the lack of color. That's the lack of archetype. That's providing just basic information. And I think you always have to provide basic information, but if you're providing information without any passion, without any emotion behind it, you're not going to be as compelling a story. And to Regent Cerna's point, it's all about that storytelling. So anyway, this is not to go too deep into this, but SITE paid for the perception study and the competitive analysis. Now what we're going to be able to do with this one-time investment is, okay, we've got the data, now let's use this to build a plan. So we will build a system-wide brand messaging framework. How are we going to talk about us as a system? How are we going to talk about each individual campus? And then out of that comes a playbook that communicators and marketers at each campus and in the colleges can use, so that when they want to take a plan and really talk about how they actualize it, this playbook will give them the step-by-step guides that they need. And then the other thing we need to do is we need to do some investment in some really core foundational tools that we've not been able to invest in. And we talked a little bit about this in January, but this will be things like quarterly media analysis reports. Are our messages pulling through? We can get coverage, but are the messages that we wanted to pull through actually making it into print or onto air? We need to do upgrades to our video equipment. Again, Regent Cerna talked about the importance of video. We absolutely agree. And there are, we have a small but mighty video team, but there are some real equipment needs that we need to shore up, because increasingly video is going to be the method of delivering that content and that emotion. The other thing we need to look at is addressing some system-wide web needs. I would say that one of my embarrassments is the fact that when you go to wsu.edu, that should be a system page. That's, for all intents and purposes, a Pullman page. And I do not think we're giving proper due to the campuses. And so that's a huge project. Ever since wsu.edu was created, it has evolved and has really been Pullman focused. It's going to take a lot of money and time for us to unweave that organic development of the website, but we need to get to a place where each campus has its own web page, and then there's a WSU page that is an entry point to all those campuses pages. Because again, it's
portal to get to.
Yeah, exactly. So
the overall experience.
So let me talk a little bit about the benefits of the funding. First of all, again, a thank you to SITE. He has given us the benchmark data that we need. We know where we stand as of 2022. Now we know that first of all, we know what we need to be saying. We can then, when we redo these perception and content studies, we can see, are we moving the needle? Are we making a difference? The lack of data has meant that we've been flying blind, and that we have been sort of working on hunches. And I am so happy that we are out of that mold and really can have some data driven discussions and plans put in place.
Bill,
Yeah.
I could stop you just for a minute. Want to make sure there's not questions, but I think what you just mentioned, for example, benchmarks on reputation, brand messaging, you know, there's this sense that WSU has got that party school image. I hear that from alumni, but what I thought was interesting is when the study data came back, that wasn't even listed as one of the top things that people perceive at WSU. I think our alumni think that's still out there. That was not reflected in the data. And the reason I mention that is that keeps us from spending a lot of marketing dollars combating something that isn't even a perception out there by the majority of these families that we're trying to target and come to WSU. On the other hand, the cost of attendance got really low marks, and we're like, you know, compared to some peers, it's clear that message that we're not that expensive to go to is not getting out there. So I think it's hard. I have my own alma mater and I have my own impressions of it, but that use of data, I just don't want to bypass this too quickly. We have now information about perceptions out there that can be used, and it may not align with what sometimes people think is out there. And that means that we can be more strategic in how we spend those dollars.
Since you, oh, I'm sorry.
I wanted to ask a follow-up question. That wasn't a question, but so mine is a question. Because to Kirk's point, you know, we may, as a communication strategy, want to say that to our industry partners, we want our brand to be a research engine. To our prospective students, we want our brand to be, we're going to help you succeed in your lives. To our alumni, we might want to have a brand that says, remember what it's like to come home, right? And those can be three different messages. And I think, you know, I'm wondering how we can take the data from that study and tease apart, because we're not going to market to prospective students the same way we would to donors necessarily. Some of it obviously overlaps, but we are all of those things that I just mentioned, but we need to be focused for specific audiences. So how do you do that?
Well, and that's a good example of the thing that I mentioned about being able to take the sort of raw data that came out of the perception study and the content analysis, and then really be able to tease that apart. And, you know, what is the next step? The data are helpful, I mean, they're wonderful, but then how do you take that to the next step, and how do you build a plan around that? And audience segmentation, you're absolutely correct. That's one of the things you need to do, because different people have different needs, even within the student group. You know, we know that some students have needs or interests in one area, other students are going to have needs and interests in another. So,
well, and leadership might have to also help provide that back to my, you have to prioritize and you have to be willing to sacrifice, because I mean, you know, I oversee 13 lines of business, and the commercial team thinks they're way better than the real estate team. And the real estate team just does the craziest things. They're lucky you have no realtors that work for you. But it's just like, it is about prioritization, but that is, some of that's going to come, I think, honestly, where the, you know, alignment with Kirk and what Kirk is, and you and Daryl and Net, that's going to look like for the university, and be willing to say, yeah, 2023 is about, breaking down the barrier of cost. And we are completely 100% committed to enrollment and recruitment and retention. What does that look like? At the cost of not being perhaps able to tell the story in 2023 about, with the full drumbeat about research. I mean, there's just a prioritization of what the alignment that the university will have to figure out what's most important. Some might say enrollment and retention, right? Because you don't get to tell the stories if you don't have the engine kind of clicking along at its highest level. So but that's where I think Phil's job is challenging, is he's got a lot of people who have a lot of ideas around what they think is the most important thing for the university.
One thing I just sort of wanted to throw in here is my alma mater, University of Maryland, has a central theme of fearless. Mm-hmm. And everything I get is, you know, and that's our fearless idea, but they apply it to a lot of things. And I don't know whether it makes sense for us to have some sort of real core, but then, as Elizabeth mentioned, then you have the things that you apply, meaning to, that are very
Yeah, it's essential.
specific
It's
areas.
That's kind of what he's getting at through this work will help determine what that kind of thread could be for across the board.
And if I could, typically what an institution will do, if they know that they have a campaign in the future, they will come up with a theme that resonates for the academic mission of the institution, but then can be tweaked slightly to support the campaign. And so we actually have been talking with the organizing committee for the campaign and talking about what the theme is. And the theme that we're sort of centering on is a theme that actually comes out of the work that we did with the Refreshing the WSU brand back in the fall. Because again, I think the foundation recognizes that you need to have that sort of, that organizing concept that resonates with everybody. And it gets back to that idea of that common experience of being a Coug, regardless of what campus you go to. There are things that if we're doing our job right, everybody can see themselves in that concept. But then something that also allows us to be able to adjust it to motivate potential donors in the future when the time comes for us to be making some of those asks. Yeah.
I think that what we're all kind of providing kind of commentary on will be the result of this great plan that you're putting together. And I'm so appreciative of the data, and I'm just going to quote Chris again, but data informs decision making. And right now we've got data that some have been able to see. And what I'm really fascinated by in terms of the perception of the party school, which is certainly a perception that I think exists, and then the media that has covered and maybe highlighted, amplified some of that, I would have thought for sure that would have come through, that helps to pivot what your strategy is and your ability to create that plan that has those segmented audiences and channels and resources that aren't just money, right? Budget, but also people, and then people within the system. So I think we're so excited that you're seeing we're really leaning in with some of those details, but I'm anxious for you to be able to bring back kind of that holistic picture where you're able to kind of outline that, because there is that overarching campaign, and then there's campaigns within that then, as Marty's saying, is prioritized with year 1, year 2, year 3, because not everything can be done at the same time. But I also don't think that it's a either or. There's a drumbeat that is WSU on every campus that isn't going to stop because we're leaning into enrollment this year. That may just be the highest level of how we're spending most of our resources, but not all.
The one thing I'll say, the president was talking about some of the takeaways from this perception study. For me, the big takeaway was great news, which was on the whole, people thought, yeah, WSU is a good institution. We didn't necessarily crack the great level, but I was fearful that we were going to be having to go from poor to good, because it's a lot more expensive to go from poor perception to a good perception than it is to go from a good perception to a great perception. And given the fact that we have not had any significant investment in marketing since at least, I think it was 2015, we've been out of the market for a really long time. There aren't many, frankly, brands out there that could still maintain their reputation without talking about what they do and why they do it. I think we are really, really fortunate that we had a very strong brand, and the good news is I don't think that we have suffered. I frankly was really concerned that we were going to be, have sort of dropped off, and had to make up ground. And so I don't know that we can go much longer resting on our laurels, but again, from a timing perspective, I think the time is right for us to be focusing on this, to be able to move from that good to great. Let me see. So we talked a little bit about the benchmarking. I think that's really, really helpful for us. We'll be able to create a roadmap that helps us build brand awareness and affinity. We talk in marketing about the idea of the funnel. I won't go into that, but good news is, the first part of that funnel is awareness. We have a high degree of awareness, which is, again, in the funnel, that's an expensive part, is to create awareness. The good news is people know who we are. Now we need to move them down that funnel to the point of affinity and supporting us through the variety of ways people can support WSU. It's going to give us clear marketing direction for our student enrollment. As Regent Dickinson said, there is a virtuous circle. If we can start really amplifying and supercharging our enrollment, we're going to see more tuition dollars that are going to be able to support other kinds of needs within the institution. So I think this is a really important area for us. And again, I keep referring to Saichi, but I told him before my presentation, I feel like I'm his biggest cheerleader, but I've worked at other universities and I can tell you that there hasn't always been, or there isn't always the level of collaboration between enrollment management and marketing. A lot of times those units are both funded and people, on one side feel like if one group gets funding, the other group isn't. And Saichi, from the very moment that he came, stepped up and said, not only does he want to be a good partner, but he's willing to put his money where his mouth is. And so we actually have a enrollment management marketing position that we both fund. I pay 50%, Saichi pays 50% of that person. She basically has a foot in both worlds. She's part of the executive team, the leadership team in enrollment management, but she's also part of my leadership team as well. We also fund her operating budget. We talk about the fact that I have about $200,000 to spend annually on marketing, but that is doubled by Saichi and his unit. So again, I think being able to have that level of partnership is really critical. And so I think we have great things to see in the future. The other thing that this plan is going to allow us to do, as we were just discussing, is determining what that appropriate budget for marketing and staffing looks like. It will allow us to do that prioritization and decide what needs to happen first and what needs to happen second. The other thing it's going to help us do is address some of the urgent needs that we talked about back in January. One of those is WSU does not have an advertising agency of record. So for example, when we wanted to create this ad for the Seattle Times, we didn't have an ad agency that could help us place that. Why is that important? Well, because they are able to buy at a much cheaper rate than we were able to. We have to pay sort of the going street rate, if you will. But if you've got an agency or a media buyer, again, we don't have a media buyer, those individuals are going to be able to get you not only a better deal, but they are going to understand what are the outlets that you should be advertising in. Lots of places where you can put your ad dollars, and they can help you make the best choice about where you spend. Another thing that is really critical for us, not only from a student enrollment perspective, but from an institutional perspective, is we need to have access to language translation services. We talked about the WSU website. That website needs to be not in English only. And so that's something that we want to be able to invest in with some of this money. And then also a data analytics manager. Again, data is really critical for us to make effective use of the dollars that we have available. And so we need to have someone who can help us take a look at the analytics. Yes.
I just want to make sure that I heard you say, did you say $200,000 for marketing? That's the extent of the budget?
Yes.
Okay.
That's the central budget that
Yes.
Phil has. So some colleges have other additional
Yes.
dollars, some of the other campuses have additional dollars. That's not all the money that WSU spends on marketing. But if you say, Phil, let's spend 20 grand on this, that's where it's got to come from. So
Is that just like direct expenses, or is that like people too?
No, that's an operating budget. I have a budget that has salaries and operations in it. And so I carve out about $200,000 a year to be
Discretionary spend.
Yes.
Marketing.
And we talked about this in January, but I would say 95% of that money goes to enrollment management marketing. Because again, I think if we can be successful in recruiting new students, we're going to see more tuition revenue, and that's just going to have that virtuous circle and really help us support not only marketing efforts, but all the other efforts we need to be successful as a university.
I'm just gonna add some commentary. This is not the profession that I'm in terms of higher ed, but given the size of the institution, that's a stunningly low number from my perspective. So you're doing a lot with not a lot to work with. So I think we tend to focus on what can you do more of, and I would just say, well done with what you have to work with. And hopefully with this plan, we're able to see how we can continue to invest in how to take it to the next level.
And I have to say, it is a tribute to my team because they are the ones who can figure out how do we take the small dollars we have and really leverage those. And they have a lot of experience working in a resource constrained environment, and they make the most of the money that they have available. So a shout out to them.
Bill, I have one question. How do you utilize, just because you seem like it would be great, and I hire a lot of marketing interns from WSU, in particular in the data analytics side. I have 2 working for me right now around digital content. I mean, they're really, they're better than, quite frankly, most of the people I'm trying to go hire outside, because they know they have a better beat on how the world is changing and how people are consuming. So are you able to use interns and kind of leverage them at your disposal a little bit, or?
Yeah, especially I would say in the social media area,
Yeah.
because so we have 2 interns that we use every semester. And I, again, shout out to our social media team. We have 2 full-time employees there, but then they bring in at least 2 student interns, and they always make sure there's sufficient overlap so the old students can really get the new students up to speed. I mean, they are in a cycle that's different than you would typically do with interns, because they've really been thoughtful about making sure there's continuity in our social media presence. And so, but beyond that, yes, we have interns who help with magazine. We have interns who help with
The
writing.
video piece too, right?
What's
that is like the whole, yeah, I mean, we're just trying to find people that have specialty in video, and it's really hard to find.
Yes.
If I could wrap this up, I know we got our time.
Yeah, I'm gonna give him until 11:35.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure the Regents hear that I think we've heard you. We will bring back a plan that's focused, that's within our budget, those kind of things. And that way, not just for an endorsement, but just really a shared sense of, okay, for the next school year, this is what you're going to focus on. Here's how we're going to plan on doing it. So I just, as we talk about some of the details, my takeaway is you expect leadership to bring you back something that says, here's what we're planning to do, and here's how we're going to do it, and here's the focus. And there'll be some things that people can go, well, gee, I wish we would do X, Y, and Z. That won't be in there, but that's okay. If we have at least agreement, I feel then we get to the end of the year, we can talk about our successes and how we executed that plan. And right now, sometimes I think people see different things that they would like to see emphasized. And this will be a way for you all as a set of Regents to give us your feedback, and then we can go and execute. Is that fair enough?
Absolutely. I would have asked to come back if you didn't invite me, because I do want to be able to share the plan, and also that I want to be able to, in a couple of years, come back and say, here's where we were at the beginning. Here's how we've moved the needle. And that's where the proof is in the pudding. Are we actually making a difference?
So Phil, I thought you did a really nice job when we met around these thoughtful questions. Just knowing that you heard from the 3 people that spend a lot of time in this space, I'd love for our other Regents to maybe answer one. Is there a question up there? I'd like to hear from like Shane and Jeanette and Brett. Like, is there a question up there from your perspective that you would like to answer or give feedback on?
And maybe it would be helpful for me, just those are basically sort of versions of the same question. Like, if WSU is doing an outstanding job of telling its story, what would that look like to you personally? I want to hear from you all. Are there marketing tactics that other universities use that WSU doesn't, that we should be thinking about? How would you define success if in 3 years we came back and said, this is where we are at that point? What would success look like to you?
I'll go
Yeah,
first.
please.
I appreciate the questions. For someone like me, the way I would frame feedback, I would agree with Lisa that if we're talking about a system budget for branding, that's a pretty small number. That's a departure point for budgeting. I've run into this when I tried to do marketing, commodity groups or other, is people, when you ask questions like this, you get these ideas of, well, gee, I need more pins with our logo on them. And it's what I call CPS, cheap plastic stuff. And that's not what I was talking about. I was trying to get our message out, right? And in order to do that, you need that other analysis of, I know the message that did well for people in our group, but that's not what you need. You need what hits the people out there to bring them, what hits prospective students. And I can't answer those questions because I don't know that data, because what's it look like to me? Well, that doesn't necessarily accomplish our goals. So that's why I'm really interested in the cross-tabbing of the other data.
Your excellent CPS. Noted. Other regents that like to provide feedback?
Yeah, so I've remained mostly silent because I am not a marketing person, but I've been listening. I guess one thing I would be curious to hear about is what that initial analysis came back regarding end of journey stories. So how are students who are graduating and how can we turn that into a story of inspiration for students? I'm thinking particularly of high school students that are leaving high school and choosing to enter into the workforce instead of pursuing their education at this moment, and talking about what the returns on that investment in your education, and specifically looking at job opportunities and salary increases and tangibly what that looks like. I'm thinking about, I'm a TA for a statistics class this semester, and I've got several students who are graduating and they're talking about job opportunities and looking, and some of it feels very dismal and some of it feels very exciting. And I'm wondering what kind of stories we have from students who are graduating and getting placed in environments that have livable wages and enjoyable work environments that comes from their education, right? And how WSU delivered on that connection to their career and a fulfilling career. Yeah.
Well, I think that links back to our earlier conversation really well. I think particularly in this moment in time, that's going to be really critical. We were talking about all the barriers for people to, whether they go to community college or a four-year institution. We talked, I think, during the break about the fact that the other piece in there is wages are actually high for many entry-level jobs. As Bill was speaking, I was thinking about an experience I had just a couple weeks ago. I was driving down the highway and pulled off into a community that was sort of a strip mall area, and passed one fast food place, and they were saying hiring now $14.90 or $14.50 an hour. I was like, wow, that's a great starting wage. And literally 2 doors down, there was another fast food place that said now hiring $15 an hour. That's interesting. And then there was a third one. It was a KFC, now hiring $17 an hour, no experience necessary. If I was 17 years old, and I had the option of going to work at $17 an hour or spending 2 years or 4 years in my perception of being sort of out of the world of work, that's a tough value proposition. And I think particularly for people who suffered under the pandemic, financially, it's quite a lure to say I could be working at $17 an hour. But to your point, Regent, is that yes, you could do that, but what are the long-term implications? We talk a lot about the fact that you get a college degree, you're going to make at least $1 million more in your career than if you don't have that college degree. That's always been a tough message for us to deliver, but now I think even more so. But it's even more critical because the big concern that we see is that when a student doesn't take that step and go into either a 2-year or 4 degree, it becomes much more difficult for them to take that step in the future. Life happens to you, you get mortgages, you buy a home, you have a family, and it's a very different issue for you than to say, I'm going to move away and live in a campus, a Pullman campus, for example. And then again, but that leans towards our strength as a system, because you could be that person who might have some college but no degree, but we've got campuses throughout the state that can meet you again where you are. So I think we're uniquely positioned to be able to address those, but I do think in the short term that's going to be a really critical message for us to deliver, to say students and parents, think about this. And if you remember,
So Phil, I'm going to interrupt you because I want it, we're
okay,
short
sorry,
on time,
I
but I
apologize.
know I want to ask Regent Ramos has
Yeah,
one too, so I just want to make sure we cover her before.
So I would just add to the emphasis of how important this topic is. and to your point, the virtuous cycle, but I would like to compliment the gallery and the whole team in support of your effort, because the integration of all these points is not just a virtuous cycle with enrollment, but the sustainability and the growth of the institution over time. And so to link back to, you know, what's the future look like for our young people, and how do we serve that going in the future? I think we need to connect all of those dots, and I think everybody in this room plays a role in what you're doing, and I, you know, just want to compliment everyone for working together and the support that you're giving each other.
I think your biggest challenge, or come back with a plan, but it has to be kind of memorable. It's almost like, did you see that last night? Or did you see that spot last night? One of the things that always caught me was the Go Cougs tag, you know, when you're in Africa or whatever. It's taking that and then, you know, building on that. And so that's still the tag at the end, but it's explaining why Go Cougs is.
Well, and that talks too about the importance of paid media, because one of the ways that you make something memorable is you have to be able to repeat it to people. They need to see it and hear it multiple times for it to really register.
Right.
So.
Phil, awesome discussion. Thank you for creating the presentation so we could have discussion. It's excellent.
Thank you. I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to come back after we had the initial discussion in January. So
yeah, we'll look forward to hearing more. So thanks, everybody. At this time, we will now adjourn our Board of Regents Washington State University Strategic and Operations Excellence Committee. And now we are convening our shareholder trustees of the Student Book Corporation. At the conclusion of the business of the Student Book Corporation, we will adjourn and break for a brief lunch, which will be returning at 1 o'clock. So welcome. We have this special meeting where we are going to be reviewing Student Book Corporation and confirmation of directors. So we're glad to have you here. Thank you for joining us, and we'll go ahead and jump right into this portion of it.
Good morning, I'm Sean Green. I'm one of the administrative directors on the SBC board. Mickey Murray, who typically also presents or has been in the past, couldn't join today. I'm here to go through the confirmation of our members. Hopefully you have the bios. Normally we would also be bringing our financial statements for the year. The SBC is also using the same firm as the institution, so we are a little bit behind schedule. We should receive those sometime this summer, and then I will coordinate with Dez and President Schultz to figure out when would be a good time to come back and review those. So we have 5 members today that we're looking for confirmation. 1 faculty representative who will be filling out a vacant faculty seat, 2 undergraduate students and 2 graduate students. Through the recruitment process, we've found a group that spans across campus. We were very pleased with the applicant pool we had. The students are part of the subcommittee that go through recruitment as we are replacing those students. The graduate students we're replacing, she is not here, she's not yet. She will be in ceremonies on Saturday. Alicia Booth successfully defended her dissertation on April 19th and will be part on Saturday. She was our chair and has been involved with the board for the last 4 years and has done an excellent job. We certainly miss her. Like all great students, hopefully they move on and move to better things. So we will be replacing her. We have our 2 graduate students that will be moving on to the board. The nominations are Monica Crosby and Brian Bessie. And then the undergraduate students are Cameron Dickey and Sydney Schweitzer. They also have a broad kind of diverse options in terms of where they are in colleges across the campus. We also have the faculty position of Dr. Chuck Munson. The only thing I can say about Dr. Munson, he was nominated from the president's office. I did get an A in his portfolio theory and financial engineering class. And I got my MBA, so we may have to not worry about a judgment a little bit. So it was
bias there, maybe a little bias.
No, I'm just saying, if I got an A in anything, it might not be great. So, but no, Dr. Munson is he's been participating in the meeting so far this year. It's been a wonderful addition. Is there any questions I can answer specifically about any SBC business?
With those grad students and the undergrad students, can you tell us where geographically, where they might be located?
Currently, the 4 nominees that are coming through are all Pullman based.
Okay.
We do the advertisement throughout the system. Ian Rowe, who was one of our graduate students who was exiting off the board, came from us via Vancouver and then Goldwire. We do a broad reach. We try to make sure that we can have representation from all campuses. This current round are all Pullman based. It is one of the struggles, I think, at times. The SBC has a physical location on the Tri-Cities and Vancouver campus, and how we serve the students also in Spokane, and Spokane as well. So, but sometimes finding those locations and getting the students from those campuses has been one of our priorities. It's challenging to do at times, but these 4 are all Pullman based.
Any questions for Sean at this time? Okay, we are actually going to take action here. So I have a motion to bring before the board. I move that the trustees and shareholders of the Student Book Corporation confirm the proposed individuals to serve on the Student Book Corporation Board of Directors.
Second.
Thank you, Brett. Any discussion?
I'll just say, I think they're all excellent candidates.
Thank you. So all those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Sean, thanks for making our meeting. We appreciate it. Okay, we will be adjourning for lunch. We again will resume back here in this room at 1 o'clock. And for Board of Regents lunches and things, we were in for breakfast. Keep feeding us. We should all go do a quick lap around.
Yeah.
No one gets